The afternoon sun was fading when she walked into the small-town bar. The old wooden sign above the door read the silver note, though most of the letters had lost their shine years ago. Inside, the faint smell of beer and fried onions hung in the air. A jukebox in the corner played soft country music, and a few regulars sat scattered around the counter. She paused for a moment at the door, her hand resting on the handle of her worn-out bag. Her coat was a little too big, and her shoes had seen better days, but she carried herself with quiet confidence, the kind that doesn't demand attention. It earns it. "Can I help you?" The bartender called out from behind the counter. He was a tall man in his 40s with rolled-up sleeves and a towel slung over his shoulder. His name was Chuck Reynolds, and he managed the place with a mix of sarcasm and tired charm. "I saw the sign outside," she said softly. "You're hiring?" Chuck looked her up and down, not rudely, just curious. "We're always hiring," he said. "Depends what you can do." "I can wait tables," she said. "Or clean." "I'm not picky," he chuckled. "Not picky, huh? That's a rare trait around here." He grabbed an application form, slid it across the counter, and nodded at a stool. "Go ahead, fill that out." "You've got the calm look." "That's good. Most folks around here panic when we get busy." She smiled faintly and took the form. Her name, Evelyn Carter, and was written neatly at the top. She filled out the rest slowly, carefully, as if each word mattered. Chuck wiped the counter while sneaking glances at her. Something about her didn't fit the usual crowd that came through the door. Her posture was too straight, her movements too graceful. When she finished, she slid the form back across the counter. Chuck scanned it briefly. "You've worked in restaurants before?" "Here and there," she said. "It's been a while." He leaned on the counter. "And what about nights?" "We're busiest after dark. We've got live music Fridays. You okay with that?" "Yes," she said quietly. He grinned. "Good, just don't try to play the piano, all right? That spot's taken. We had a girl once who thought she could outplay our house guy. Didn't end well," he laughed. "I swear if one more waitress tries to be a musician, I'll quit." Evelyn's lips curved into a small, almost secret smile. "Don't worry," she said. "I'm just here to work," Chuck shrugged. "That's all I need to hear." He grabbed an apron from under the counter and handed it to her. "You start tonight. It's Taco Tuesday, not glamorous, but it pays the bills." She nodded and took the apron. By 7 o'clock, the bar was busier. The lights dimmed to a warm amber glow, and the buzz of conversation filled the air. A man at the piano near the stage played slow blues, his fingers heavy but practiced. Evelyn weaved between tables, balancing trays and smiling politely. She wasn't loud or talkative, but she had a calming presence. Customers liked her right away. "New girl's got poise," one of the regulars whispered to Chuck. "She's not like the others." Chuck grinned. "We'll see how long that lasts." Behind the bar, he watched her. She moved with a rhythm he couldn't quite name, like someone who'd spent her life performing without meaning to. When she walked past the piano, her eyes lingered on the keys for half a second. "Just long enough for Chuck to notice. You play?" he asked later, half joking as she dropped off empty glasses. She looked up, caught off guard. "Used to," she said simply. He laughed. "Ah, there it is, I knew it. Every waitress who's ever worked here thinks she can play. Let me tell you something. If you play the piano, I'll quit." There was laughter around the bar. Evelyn smiled again, that same quiet smile. "Then I guess your job is safe," she said. Chuck didn't think much of it, but something about her tone stayed with him. It wasn't defensive or embarrassed, just matter of fact, like she was used to people not knowing who she was. The night went smoothly. She handled rush hour like she'd been doing it for years. When closing time came, she stayed behind to wipe down tables and stack chairs without being asked. Chuck noticed that too. "You're a hard worker," he said, leaning against the bar. "Most new hires can't wait to clock out," she shrugged. "It feels good to stay busy." He nodded, then gestured toward the piano. "That old thing's been here longer than me. You know, the guy who plays it now. He's decent, but he drinks too much. I swear one night he's gonna fall asleep mid-song." Evelyn's eyes drifted to the piano again. "It's a nice instrument," she said softly. "Nice?" Chuck snorted. "It's ancient. Keys stick, pedals squeak, and half the notes are flat. But it gets the job done." She smiled faintly. "Still, a piano's a piano." He gave her a curious look but didn't press. Everyone had their quirks. Hers, he figured, was nostalgia. As she left that night, she paused by the stage. The lights were off and the piano sat in silence, its black surface reflecting the dim glow of a neon beer sign. She reached out and touched one of the keys, pressing it lightly. A soft note rang out. Shaky, a little out of tune, but beautiful in its own way. For the first time in years, she felt her heart stir. Outside, the night air was cool. She pulled her coat tighter and started walking home. The streets were quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but for her it was perfect. She wanted peace, not attention. Her apartment was a small one-bedroom above a laundromat. Bare walls, a tiny kitchen, a single chair by the window. She made tea and sat in the dark, staring out at the streetlights below. From somewhere down the block she could hear faint music, someone playing guitar. She closed her eyes and smiled. Music still had a way of finding her, even when she tried to hide from it. Evelyn hadn't touched a real piano in years. She'd promised herself she wouldn't. After her husband's death, the sound of the keys became unbearable. Every chord reminded her of what she'd lost. The nights they'd spent playing duets, laughing, planning concerts that never happened. She'd walked away from all of it. Now she was just another face in a small town, and that was how she liked it. The next few weeks at the Silver Note passed quietly. Evelyn fit in quickly. The regulars liked her, the staff respected her, and even Chuck, who was famously hard to impress, admitted she was the best hire he'd made in years. "You've got that steady touch," he told her one night as they closed up. "You don't rush, you don't panic." "It's rare," she smiled. "Years of practice, I suppose." He nodded. Practice makes perfect. She didn't tell him what kind of practice she meant. Sometimes, when the bar was empty after closing, she'd linger near the piano again. She'd run her fingers along the edge, not pressing the keys, just feeling the texture. Chuck caught her once and joked, "Don't tell me you're tempted to play." She laughed softly. "Tempted? Maybe," he grinned. "If you ever do, remember what I said, I'll quit." They both laughed, and that became their running joke. He had no idea how close she was to breaking her silence. One night, when a thunderstorm rolled over town, the bar emptied early. The rain hit the windows hard, and the piano player called in to say his car had broken down. Chuck sighed and told everyone they'd have to skip the live music. The crowd didn't mind much, but Evelyn felt a pull in her chest she hadn't felt in years. When the last customer left, she stayed behind again, wiping tables as the rain tapped on the glass. The piano sat silent in the corner, waiting. She glanced at Chuck, who was counting cash at the bar. "Funny," he said, not looking up. "You ever notice how quiet this place feels without the piano?" "Yes," she said softly. "Too quiet," he smirked. "Well, unless you're planning to save the night, I guess that's that." She smiled faintly but said nothing. Instead, she walked over to the piano and lifted the fallboard, revealing the keys. Her reflection looked back at her from the glossy surface. Older now, but still the same person who once lived for the sound of music. She pressed a single note, gentle, hesitant, and the sound echoed through the empty room. Chuck looked up, eyebrows raised. "Careful," he said jokingly. "You might make me quit," but she only smiled. "I'll take that risk," she whispered. She played another note, then another, her fingers trembling slightly. The melody was simple, almost childlike, but full of feeling. Chuck froze. He wasn't sure what he was hearing, but it wasn't amateur. It was something else entirely. Before he could say anything, she stopped. "Just testing," she said, lowering the cover again. Chuck blinked. "You sure that's all you were doing?" She nodded with a small smile. "Just testing." He wanted to ask more, but she'd already hung up her apron and was heading for the door. As she stepped outside, the rain had stopped. The smell of wet pavement filled the air. She tilted her head back, letting the cool breeze touch her face. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like running from the past. She felt ready. Back inside, Chuck stood by the piano, staring at it as if it had just revealed a secret. He shook his head and laughed under his breath. "If you play the piano, I'll quit," he muttered to himself with a grin. Something told him he might just have to keep that promise. The next morning, the town was wrapped in a quiet fog. The streets glistened from the night's rain, and the shop windows were just beginning to light up. Evelyn walked to work early, her shoes tapping softly against the damp pavement. She liked mornings like this, not still peaceful, almost forgiving. When she reached the Silver Note, Chuck was already inside. restocking the shelves behind the bar. He looked up when she walked in. "You're early," he said, surprised. She smiled. "Couldn't sleep," he chuckled. "You and me both. Coffee's fresh if you want some." She nodded and poured herself a cup. The bar was empty except for the faint smell of cleaning supplies and the soft hum of a refrigerator. It was the calm before the storm. The few quiet hours before the doors opened and life filled the room again. Chuck leaned on the counter, watching her for a moment. "You know," he said casually, "I was thinking about last night." She looked up, her expression careful. "Oh?" He pointed toward the piano. "You played a note or two before you left. That didn't sound like someone who just used to play. That sounded like someone who still can." Evelyn stirred her coffee. "It's been a long time," she said softly. "Uh-huh," he said with a skeptical grin. "You sure you're not holding out on me? Because if you are, I'll have to put you on stage and take a night off." She smiled faintly but didn't answer. There was something in her eyes, not fear but a quiet sadness that made him stop joking. "All right," he said, holding up his hands. "No pressure. Just saying, that piano sounded better in those 5 seconds than it has in 5 years." She took a sip of her coffee and looked toward the piano. It sat there, silent and unbothered, as if it knew it was waiting for her. That day went by like any other. Lunch rush, laughter, noise. The regular rhythm of a bar that had seen 1,000 ordinary days. Evelyn kept busy, moving smoothly between tables, greeting familiar faces, listening to the stories people told her. She had a way of making people feel seen without prying, which made her well-liked. One of the regulars, an older man named Walter, liked to sit at the counter and talk about his younger days in a jazz band. He noticed the way Evelyn hummed while she worked, just softly enough to hear if you were close. "You've got music in you," he said one afternoon, smiling. "People who hum like that can't help it. It just leaks out." She laughed softly. "Old habits. Old habits are the best kind," he said. "You ever play?" "Once upon a time," she replied, wiping down the counter. He tilted his head. "What happened?" She hesitated for a moment. "Life," she said finally. Walter nodded slowly. "Yeah, that'll do it." That night the bar filled with the usual crowd. The piano player, a man named Lenny, was back. A bit red-eyed, a bit too talkative, but talented. He played his usual set of blues and swing tunes, filling the room with easy rhythm. Evelyn worked the tables, refilling glasses and exchanging smiles, but every time she passed by the stage, her attention drifted toward the piano. Her fingers itched every time she heard a chord slightly off, every time Lenny rushed through a transition. She didn't mean to judge, but when you've lived inside music, it's hard not to notice its flaws. During a break, Lenny came over to the bar. "That new waitress," he said, nodding toward Evelyn. "She's got a musician's hands." "You noticed that?" Chuck laughed. "You're imagining things." Lenny shook his head. "Nah, man. You can tell. The way she moves, the way she listens, and that's not normal." "Bet you she's played before," Chuck smirked. "She told me she used to. But she says she's done with all that." Lenny shrugged. "Nobody's ever done with music. You can walk away, but it always finds you again." Chuck raised an eyebrow. "That poetic wisdom come before or after your third whiskey?" Lenny grinned. "A little of both." The night went on, but Chuck couldn't shake the thought. Maybe Lenny was right. There was something about Evelyn that didn't fit her quiet life. She moved like someone who'd seen more than she said. After closing, when the chairs were up and the lights dimmed, Chuck stayed behind doing paperwork. He heard a faint sound, a note soft and careful coming from the piano. He looked up. Evelyn was there again. Her back was to him, her hands hovering over the keys. She wasn't playing a song, just testing notes one at a time, as if reacquainting herself with an old friend. He didn't interrupt. He just watched quietly as she played a few gentle chords. The sound was imperfect, but full of something deep and personal, like someone remembering how to breathe. After a few minutes, she stopped and closed the lid. When she turned around and saw him watching, she froze. "I didn't mean to," she began. He shook his head. "Don't apologize. That was beautiful." She looked away. "It's just habit. I wasn't really playing." "Sure looked like you were," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Old habits." Then she grabbed her coat and left before he could say anything else. Chuck stood there a long time, staring at the piano. He couldn't explain it, but her short melody lingered in the air even after she was gone. Over the next few weeks, things started to shift. Evelyn became part of the bar's heartbeat. She knew what every regular ordered, remembered small details about their lives, and carried a kind of calm that softened even the roughest nights. But every so often, when no one was looking, she'd drift near the piano. Sometimes she'd wipe it clean. Sometimes she'd just sit on the bench for a minute. One Friday evening, just before the crowd arrived, Chuck found her there again. "You ever think about playing again?" he asked casually. She didn't look at him. "Not really. Why not?" "Because it hurts," she said quietly. He frowned. "Music hurts?" She gave a sad little smile. "It does when it reminds you of everything you lost." He didn't know what to say after that. So he just nodded and walked away, feeling like he'd glimpsed something important, something she wasn't ready to share. Later that night, the bar was packed. Lenny was drunker than usual, but still trying to play. He missed chords, slurred transitions, and even stopped mid-song to joke with the crowd. Most people didn't care. They were there for the drinks, not the music, but Evelyn flinched with every wrong note. At one point, Lenny laughed, stood up, and shouted, "Anyone else want to give it a go? I'm too sober for this piano tonight." The crowd laughed. Chuck rolled his eyes. "Sit down, Lenny." But someone in the back shouted, "Let the new girl try." Everyone turned toward Evelyn. She froze, holding a tray in her hands. "Oh, come on," Lenny said, grinning. "She's been staring at the keys all week. Let's see what she's got." Chuck stepped in quickly. "Leave her alone, guys." "She's not," but Evelyn put down the tray. "It's all right," she said softly. The room quieted a little. She walked toward the piano, her heart pounding. She hadn't planned this. She didn't even know what she'd play. She just felt an invisible pull, like something deep inside her was finally ready to speak. She sat down on the bench, adjusted the seat slightly, and placed her fingers on the keys. The noise of the crowd faded to a low hum. For a moment she hesitated. Then she began to play. The first notes were gentle, cautious. But then the melody grew stronger. It wasn't a famous song or a rehearsed piece. It was something personal, something she'd written long ago when life was full of love and promise. The room went silent. Every eye turned to her. Even the clinking of glasses stopped. Her hands moved effortlessly, the years melting away with each chord. She wasn't the quiet waitress anymore. She was someone else entirely. Chuck stood frozen behind the bar, his mouth slightly open. He'd never heard anything like it. Not in this place, not in his life. When the final note faded, the silence that followed was almost sacred. Then the room erupted into applause. People whistled, cheered, clapped until their hands hurt. Evelyn stood up slowly, her eyes glistening. "That's enough," she said softly. "Just this once." Chuck walked over, still stunned. "Evelyn," he said quietly, "who are you?" She smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile. "Just someone who used to play," she said, and walked away. Lenny stared after her, shaking his head. "Used to play? My God, that was real." The night carried on, but nothing felt the same. The customers kept talking about her performance, replaying every detail. Chuck barely slept. He couldn't stop thinking about it. The way she played. The look in her eyes. The weight in her silence. The next morning, he found her at the bar early again, sipping coffee like nothing had happened. "You realize you stopped time last night, right?" he said. She laughed softly. "It was just a song." He leaned on the counter. "Not to everyone else it wasn't. You've got people asking if you'll play again tonight." She shook her head. "No, once was enough." He studied her for a long moment. "You're not just some waitress, are you?" She looked at him and smiled sadly. "No," she said quietly, "but I'm trying to be." And before he could ask anything more, she picked up her apron and went to work, leaving Chuck staring after her, wondering what kind of story could make someone that good walk away from music. Days passed after Evelyn's unexpected performance, but the memory of that night refused to fade. The regulars still talked about it as if it had been some kind of dream. People who hadn't even been there claimed they had. They came to the bar just to ask about her, the quiet woman who played like she was born for it. Evelyn, however, pretended nothing had happened. She went back to work as usual, polite and calm, as if that night had been just another shift. When someone mentioned the piano, she smiled and changed the subject, but Chuck couldn't let it go. He'd seen a lot of musicians come and go, drunks, dreamers, and kids who thought talent alone would save them. But Evelyn was different. There was a depth in her playing that couldn't be faked. You could feel her story in every note. One afternoon, he found her in the back room organizing supplies. "You know," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "you're still the talk of the town." She didn't look up. "That'll fade soon." "Maybe," he said. "But I don't think people forget something." "Like that?" She smiled faintly. "People forget everything eventually," he frowned. "You really don't want to play again?" She shook her head. "No, that was a one-time thing." "Why?" She hesitated, then turned toward him. "Because once you open that door, it's hard to close again." He wanted to ask what she meant, but the look in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't anger, it was pain, the kind that runs deep. That evening, the bar was busy again. Lenny, the piano player, gave her a playful salute when she walked in. "So, superstar," he said, "you planning to steal my job?" She laughed lightly. "Not a chance. You play just fine." "Fine?" he said, pretending to be offended. "That's all I get, fine?" "All right," she said, smiling. "You play great." Lenny grinned. "That's better. Still, if you ever want to share the stage, you just say the word." She nodded but didn't promise anything. When the night ended, she stayed to clean up as usual. The piano sat under the low lights, its black surface reflecting tiny spots of gold from the hanging bulbs. She ran her hand along the edge again, almost absent-mindedly. Chuck noticed. "You know," he said quietly, "that piano's been more alive since you touched it." She smiled. "Maybe it just needed someone to care about it." "Maybe it needs you," he said. She didn't answer. Later that night, after she left, Chuck sat at the bar with a drink, thinking. He couldn't shake the feeling that she had a story she wasn't telling. Something big. He decided not to push her, but curiosity gnawed at him. Over the next week, her life began to shift in small ways. People smiled more when she passed. Some customers asked if she'd teach their kids piano. One man even offered to book her for a private event. She declined every offer with a polite shake of her head. Then one night, something happened that would change everything. It was Friday again, the busiest night of the week. The bar was packed, the air thick with laughter and music. But halfway through the evening, Lenny stumbled during a song. He blinked, tried to keep playing, then stopped completely. "Sorry, folks," he slurred. "I think I'm done for tonight," the crowd groaned. Chuck sighed and motioned for him to sit down. "Go get some water," he said. The piano sat silent again, the night's rhythm broken. People started talking louder, filling the gap with noise. Then a voice came from the back. "Let her play." All eyes turned to Evelyn. She froze, holding a tray of glasses. "No, the crowd started cheering. "Play, play, play." Chuck raised his hands. All right, calm down." He looked at Evelyn. "You don't have to, really." But the look on her face was different this time. She wasn't nervous. She was thinking. Deeply. Finally, she set the tray down and walked slowly toward the stage. The cheers grew louder. Chuck watched her, his heart pounding for reasons he didn't quite understand. She sat down on the bench, closed her eyes for a moment, and took a deep breath. When her fingers touched the keys, the noise in the bar faded into silence. She began with something simple, a soft melody that floated through the air like a breeze. Then it grew stronger, fuller, richer. The sound filled every corner of the room, and the people who'd been laughing seconds ago sat frozen, listening. It wasn't just music. It was emotion made real. Sadness, hope, love, loss, and all tangled together. Every note told a story. Chuck couldn't take his eyes off her. He'd never seen anyone so alive. Her expression changed with the music, her brows tightening, her lips trembling, her shoulders swaying gently. It was as if she'd forgotten where she was. When the song ended, the silence that followed was almost as powerful as the music itself. Then came the applause, thunderous, heartfelt, endless. People stood on their feet. Some even had tears in their eyes. Evelyn didn't bow. She just smiled, small and genuine, and whispered, "Thank you." After that night, there was no turning back. Word spread fast, faster than anyone expected. The story of the mysterious woman at the silver note started making rounds in nearby towns. A few locals posted videos of her playing. Within days, they had thousands of views. Chuck couldn't believe it. People were calling the bar, asking when she'd play again. Musicians came by just to see her. The quiet, forgotten bar had become the town's new attraction. Evelyn, though, didn't change. She still showed up early, still served drinks, still wiped tables with the same gentle care. She didn't seem to care about fame or attention. One evening, Chuck sat with her during a slow hour. "You know you're kind of famous now, right?" She laughed softly. "Fame isn't real." He tilted his head. "You don't want to take this further? You could really make something out of it." She shook her head. "I've already had all that," he frowned. "Had?" She hesitated, then sighed. "A long time ago I played on real stages. Big ones, New York, Chicago, Boston. All of it." Chuck stared. "Wait, seriously?" She nodded. "I was young and music was everything. I thought it would save me." "What happened?" he asked quietly. She took a deep breath. "I met someone and another musician. He believed in me more than I did. We played together, traveled, dreamed big. Then one night on our way to a concert there was a storm. His car went off the road." Her voice broke slightly, but she didn't cry. "He didn't make it. I stopped playing after that." Every note reminded me of him. Chuck's throat tightened. "I'm so sorry," he said softly. She smiled faintly. "Life goes on." "But music?" "Music stayed quiet for a long time." He nodded slowly, understanding now why she'd been hiding. From that day forward, he treated her differently, not just as an employee, but as someone carrying something precious. The next Friday, the bar was packed again. People begged her to play. She said no at first, but after some convincing and a gentle smile from Chuck, she agreed. That night, she played something different. Not sad this time, but warm, hopeful, alive. The kind of music that made people remember the best parts of life. The bar wasn't just a bar anymore. It became something sacred, a place where people came to feel. After she finished, she looked at Chuck and said quietly, "He would have liked this." Chuck nodded, smiling. "Yeah, I bet he would have." From then on, every week she played one song, just one, and every time the room went silent. People came from miles away just to hear her. Some cried, some smiled, some just sat still and listened. And Chuck, the man who once joked he'd quit if she ever played, found himself standing behind the bar every night watching in awe. One evening, as she packed up to leave, he laughed softly. "You know, I think I might actually have to quit now." She looked at him with surprise. "Why's that?" He grinned. "Because you've turned this place into something bigger than me." She smiled. "Then don't quit. Just listen." He nodded. "Deal." That night, after everyone had gone, she stayed behind for a moment. She sat alone at the piano, fingers resting gently on the keys. For the first time in years, she felt peace. Not the kind that hides pain, but the kind that accepts it. Outside, the street was quiet. The neon sign buzzed faintly in the dark. Inside, the silver note glowed warm and soft, like a memory that refused to fade. And in that quiet moment, Evelyn smiled to herself and whispered, "I'm home." The silver note was no longer the quiet little bar it used to be. What once was just a spot for beer and small-town chatter had turned into something different, almost magical. People from nearby towns came every weekend just to see the woman who played the piano, like she was talking to the soul. Evelyn never asked for any of it. She still wore the same simple clothes, still wiped tables, still greeted people with her quiet smile. She didn't perform for fame, she played for peace. One song a week, that was her rule. Chuck had stopped trying to convince her to play more. He understood now. She wasn't chasing applause. She was healing, one note at a time. Every Friday night, the bar filled early. Couples came on dates, families brought their kids, even people who didn't usually care about music showed up. When Evelyn sat down at the piano, the crowd went silent. No one needed to be told to listen. It just happened naturally. Her music wasn't flashy or loud. It was real. It reminded people of something they'd forgotten, something gentle and true. One night near the end of a song, a man sitting near the back pulled out his phone and began recording. It wasn't unusual. People often took videos now. But this time something different happened. The video spread fast and faster than anyone expected. By the next morning it had reached thousands of views online. Within a week it had hundreds of thousands. People were sharing it everywhere. They called her the mystery pianist. Some said she was a teacher. Some said she used to be a famous musician who vanished years ago. Nobody knew for sure, but everyone agreed on one thing. She was extraordinary. The bar phone started ringing nonstop. Reporters wanted interviews. Bloggers wanted details. Music producers sent emails asking if she'd come to the city to record. Chuck tried to protect her from the chaos. "You want me to handle all this?" he asked one morning. Evelyn looked at the stack of messages on the counter. "You can throw them away," she said calmly. "You sure? Some of these are big names." "I'm sure," she said. "I'm not going back there." He nodded, respecting her choice, but deep down he knew it wasn't going to stop. Once the world wanted something, it didn't let go easily. A few days later, a man walked into the bar in a tailored coat and polished shoes. He looked out of place among the flannel shirts and neon lights. "I'm looking for Evelyn Carter," he said politely. Chuck frowned. "Who's asking?" "My name's Henry Davis. I'm with the Herald Review. I'd like to talk to her." Chuck sighed. "She doesn't do interviews," Henry smiled. "Everyone says that. Until they do." Evelyn came out from the back, wiping her hands on a towel. When she saw him, she stopped. "You're a journalist?" "Yes, ma'am," he said, offering a small smile. "And a fan, if I'm honest. I saw the video. You play beautifully." "Thank you," she said, her voice calm but guarded. "I don't want to pry," he continued. "But people are wondering who you are. You've become something of a mystery. Some say you used to perform in New York." She hesitated. "A long time ago," he nodded. "I thought so. I did a little digging. You studied at Juilliard, didn't you?" Chuck blinked. "Wait, what?" Evelyn looked down. "That was another lifetime," she said softly. The journalist smiled kindly. "People would love to hear your story. You could inspire so many." She shook her head. "I didn't come here to be found." He opened his notebook but didn't write anything. "May I ask why you stopped playing?" Her hands tightened around the towel. "Because sometimes when you lose everything, the only thing left to do is be quiet." The man nodded slowly. He could see there was more behind her silence than she was ready to say. "All right," he said gently. "If you ever want your story told, want the real one, and you know where to find me." He handed her his card and left. Chuck watched her carefully. "Juilliard?" he said after a long moment. She gave a small smile. "That's where it started." He shook his head, still in disbelief. "You weren't just good. You were the real thing," she sighed softly. "Once, maybe? But that was before." "Before what?" he asked quietly. "Before life decided I needed to learn silence," she said, and walked away. But the story didn't stay silent for long. Within a few days, more people showed up. Photographers, reporters, even fans. Some waited outside just to catch a glimpse of her. Chuck had to hang a sign on the door, "No interviews." No recordings during performance. Evelyn wasn't angry, but she grew quieter. She still played her one song every week, still smiled for her customers, but there was a shadow in her eyes now. Then one night, something unexpected happened. As she played her usual Friday song, a man sitting near the front suddenly stood up, tears in his eyes. "I know this music," he said. "You played this at Carnegie Hall 15 years ago." The room went completely still. Evelyn froze. "You're Evelyn Carter," he continued softly. "You were the youngest solo pianist to perform there. You disappeared after—" He stopped, realizing he'd said too much. Evelyn's hands dropped from the keys. The crowd turned toward her, whispering. She took a deep breath and looked up. "Yes," she said quietly. "That was me." The whispers turned into stunned silence. Chuck watched her carefully. He could tell she wasn't angry, just tired. She stood up slowly and faced the crowd. "I stopped playing because life got heavy," she said softly. "Music was the only thing that made sense, and when I lost the person who shared it with me, I didn't know how to keep going. So I stopped. I thought maybe I'd find peace in silence, but silence is lonely. And I realized you can't hide from what you were born to do." The room stayed quiet. No one moved. "I play now," she continued, "not for stages or fame. I play because it reminds me that love never really dies, it just changes." She sat back down and began to play again, a soft, emotional tune that wrapped the whole room in warmth. By the time she finished, there wasn't a dry eye in sight. From that night on, she didn't hide anymore. She didn't seek fame, but she no longer ran from her past either. She allowed herself to be who she was, a woman who had loved deeply, lost deeply, and found her way back through music. Soon, the local paper published an article about her. It wasn't flashy or sensational, it was honest. It told the story of a woman who once filled grand halls but found peace in a small-town bar. The piece went viral. Musicians, fans, and even old colleagues reached out, sharing how her story touched them. But through it all, Evelyn stayed humble. She told Chuck one night, "I'm grateful for the attention, but I don't want to go back to that world. I like it here. I like playing for people who listen with their hearts." He smiled. "You've changed this place, you know that?" She laughed softly. "I think this place changed me first." A few weeks later, she received a letter, handwritten, elegant, with a gold seal. It was from the director of a major music festival. They wanted her to perform one last time, a tribute to her career and her late husband. Chuck watched her read it, her fingers trembling slightly. "You going to do it?" he asked. She didn't answer right away. "I don't know," she whispered. "It feels like closing a circle, but I don't want to leave what I've found here." He nodded. "Then maybe you don't have to choose. Maybe this isn't an ending. Maybe it's just the next song." That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her piano, the same old bar piano with its sticky keys, and played softly to herself. The melody was familiar but different, filled with both pain and peace. She thought about everything she'd lost, and everything she'd found since then. The laughter in the bar, the kindness of strangers, the comfort of being seen without judgment. And as dawn broke, painting the sky in soft gold, she finally knew her answer. When she arrived at work that morning, Chuck was unlocking the front door. She handed him the letter. "I'll go," she said. "But only if you come too," he grinned. "Wouldn't miss it." By the following week, the town buzzed with excitement. Posters went up announcing her comeback. Evelyn Carter, one night only. People couldn't believe it. The woman they'd seen wiping tables and pouring coffee was about to return to the grand stage. And even though she was nervous, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in years, peace mixed with purpose. Before she left, she sat alone in the silver note one last time, running her fingers across the piano keys. "Thank you," she whispered to the instrument that had brought her back to life. The bar was empty, but she swore she could still hear the echo of her own music in the walls. Then she smiled, locked the door behind her, and stepped into the morning light, ready to face the world again. The train ride to the city felt like traveling through time. The closer they got, the more memories stirred inside her. The lights, the noise, the excitement, the fear. Evelyn sat by the window watching the fields give way to buildings, her reflection flickering in the glass. Chuck sat across from her, holding a paper cup of coffee. "You nervous?" he asked softly. "Maybe a little," she said, smiling faintly. "It's been a long time since I've seen this place." He nodded. "I can imagine. But I think it's ready for you again." Evelyn turned her eyes back to the window. "I'm not sure I'm ready for it." When they arrived, the city was loud and alive, just as she remembered. The air carried that mix of car exhaust, roasted coffee, and rain on concrete. Every sound, every scent, every glimpse of the skyline reminded her of who she used to be. The woman who lived for the stage, who spent nights practicing until her fingers ached. But she wasn't that woman anymore. They checked into a small hotel near the concert hall. The staff greeted her politely, though one of them seemed to recognize her. Evelyn smiled kindly, hoping not to draw attention. The rehearsal was scheduled for the next afternoon. When she stepped into the hall, her breath caught. It was the same grand stage she had stood on years ago, the same golden lights, the same polished floors, the same silence before the music began. She walked slowly to the piano, her fingers trembling slightly as she brushed across the keys. They felt familiar, like an old friend she hadn't spoken to in years. She pressed one softly, and the sound filled the empty hall. It was clear, rich, alive. Chuck stood near the back, watching quietly. He had never seen her in this setting before. The way she carried herself, the calm power that surrounded her when she was near a piano. It was as if she belonged there. The stage manager came over. "Miss Carter, do you need anything before we begin?" She smiled. "No, thank you. Just a moment." She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The sound of the piano echoed softly in her mind, not from the present but from the past. She remembered her last concert, the night before everything changed. Her husband waiting backstage with flowers, the way he smiled at her before the lights dimmed, the drive home that never finished. Her throat tightened, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she let the memory sit quietly beside her. No longer painful, just real. When she opened her eyes, she placed both hands on the keys and began to play. The music was gentle, but every note carried years of silence, loss, and rediscovery. It was a song she'd written herself, one no one had ever heard before. It spoke of the long road between grief and peace, between who she was and who she had become. Chuck listened, unable to move. It wasn't just music, it was a story without words. When she finished, the hall stayed quiet for a long moment. The stage manager cleared his throat softly. "That was beautiful," he said. "Tomorrow night's going to be something special." Evelyn nodded. "I hope so." After rehearsal, she and Chuck walked through the city streets. The sun was setting, painting the sky in orange and gold. "You did amazing," he said. She smiled softly. "It felt right, like I finally made peace with everything." "You think you'll keep performing?" She shook her head. "No, I think this one is enough. This isn't about coming back. It's about letting go." Chuck nodded. He understood. The next evening, the concert hall filled with people. Every seat was taken. Reporters, musicians, old friends, and fans. Everyone had come to see the woman who disappeared and returned after so many years. The stage lights glowed softly, the room buzzing with quiet anticipation. Backstage, Evelyn sat alone for a few minutes before they called her name. She looked down at her hands. They weren't as young as they used to be, but they were steady, strong, ready. She could hear the muffled sound of the crowd, the gentle murmur, the soft rustling of programs, the coughs and whispers before the first note. It was a sound she had missed without realizing it. Chuck peeked in. "You okay?" She smiled. "I'm ready." When she walked onto the stage, the entire audience rose to their feet. The applause thundered through the hall, but she only smiled humbly and nodded in thanks. She sat at the piano and waited until the room grew quiet. Then she began. The first song was a soft classical piece, familiar, comforting. The notes flowed smoothly like water over stone. People leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the calm, steady rhythm. The second piece was livelier, full of energy and joy. It was the kind of song that made you remember what it felt like to be young, to believe in beginnings. And then came the third, the one she'd written herself, the one she had played the night before. She closed her eyes as she played, her heart open, her soul laid bare. Each note carried a piece of her journey. The quiet bar, the laughter, the pain, the rediscovery of music in unexpected places. The sound grew and softened like breathing, like life itself. In that moment, it felt as if time stood still. Chuck watched from the front row, tears gathering in his eyes. Around him, people were motionless, listening with their hearts instead of their ears. When the last note faded, there was silence, a silence so deep and full that it felt sacred. Then the applause began, soft at first, then growing louder until the hall shook with it. People stood, clapping, cheering, some wiping away tears. Evelyn stood and bowed gracefully. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. The music had said it all. After the concert, she met the director of the festival backstage. "That was extraordinary," he said. "You could tour again if you wanted to." She smiled gently. "Thank you. But this was my last stage. It's time to go home." He nodded respectfully. "Then thank you for reminding us what music is supposed to be." Outside, the night was cool and calm. Chuck was waiting near the door, his hands in his coat pockets. When he saw her, he smiled. "Guess I'll have to keep my word," he said with a chuckle. "I told you if you ever played the piano, I'd quit." She laughed softly. "You're not serious." "Oh, I am," he said. "But don't worry, I'll stick around long enough to buy you dinner first." They both laughed, walking together down the quiet street. As they reached the corner, she paused and looked up at the sky. The stars were faint behind the city lights, but she could still see them. "It's strange," she said. "All those years I thought I'd lost everything. But maybe I just needed time to find the music again, and in a different way." Chuck nodded. "Sometimes we just have to go quiet before we can really hear ourselves." They walked on, side by side, through the glow of the city. When they returned to the Silver Note a few days later, the bar was filled with familiar faces waiting to welcome her back. There were flowers on the counter, a banner that said, "Our legend returns home." Evelyn laughed when she saw it. "I told you I'm no legend," Chuck grinned. "You are to us." She smiled, touched by the warmth in the room. "All right then. Just one song." She sat down at the old piano, the same one that had brought her back to life cue, and began to play. The sound filled the bar, soft and steady, wrapping everyone in its quiet beauty. This time, she wasn't performing for a crowd or a reputation. She was playing for her friends, for the small-town faces that had reminded her that life could still be kind. The song ended, and the room erupted in applause. Chuck leaned over the counter and said with a grin, "You sure you don't want to make this a regular thing?" She smiled. "Maybe, but only if you promise not to quit this time." He laughed. "Deal." As the laughter and chatter filled the room again, Evelyn sat quietly for a moment, letting the warmth of the evening sink in. The past no longer felt heavy, and it felt complete. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her story. She was living it. Outside, the night air was cool, and a soft breeze carried the faint sound of her music out into the street. A few passers-by stopped, listening, smiling without even knowing who was playing. And inside the silver note, under the glow of warm light, Evelyn Carter played one last soft melody. Not a goodbye, but a promise to keep the music alive wherever life led her next. The piano's final note lingered in the air, sweet and still, as if even the world itself wanted to listen a little longer.